Well, welcome back after the break. We're ready to start the next section of the meeting. So the first half of the meeting, we really talked about the platform, how we want to use the data, how we are using the data through some prototypes and where we are now. The second half of the meeting is going to be more about data sharing, interactions with the community, with the rare disease community, and where we're going next. So for those of you who were not with us for the first half of the meeting, I'm Jane Larkindale. I'm the Executive Director of the Rare Disease Cures Accelerated Data and Analytics Platform from c-path. So the purpose of this introduction to the session is really to talk about the whole process we use for bringing data into the RDC-ADAP and how we're trying to optimize this to make it as easy as possible for people to share data with us, at the same time as not making it too difficult for people to not making it too difficult for people to access the data at the other end. So this really came out as a question in the previous session of why do people want to share data in the first place? Data is valuable. You've presumably worked quite hard to to access data and to gather the data in the first place. Why would people want to share data? And we talked in the last panel about the fact that it's useful to everyone to have access to not only your own data, but other people's data to really get into asking more questions, bigger questions, answering the questions on a more global scale, and being able to really access data on a broader range of people so you understand the disease as a whole. But we also have specific reasons for sharing data depending on stakeholder group. So first of all, for patients and patients group, of course, this is all about faster drug development, but also understanding the disease course. I mentioned in the last panel, visibility to industry. Industry knows that there is data in existence on a disease. They're much more likely to move into that disease space. They know they'll be able to run clinical trials. They'll know that there are things that they can measure, things they can interpret. And it's going to be much easier for them to develop a drug. And it'll be much faster and much more efficient to get to, hopefully, an approved drug for that disease. And also the access to data drives collaboration across all the stakeholders in the rare disease space. For industry, all of these things hold true as well. Designing more effective trials using both their data and other people's data is always going to be more effective. I've been running a project in Duchenne muscular dystrophy for the past 5 years, and the number of companies who have both wanted to access the data we have in our database, but also contribute their data, because they understand that all the data together will help them develop better trials and understand that their drug works faster and more quickly, and understand what to measure in an effective way so that those trials can be as quick, fast, and cheap as possible. It makes sense for industry to share. And then for academics, of course, it improves their research. If they can compare and contrast their data with other people's data, they can use it to understand disease course invariants, develop biomarkers, endpoints. That by using bigger data sets, you get more visibility of data and research, you can build collaboration and publish more and better papers. So really, there are reasons for everyone to share. And yet, at the same time, data sharing at this time is not particularly easy. If we look at it in a different way, there have been multiple papers looking at whether patients themselves are willing to share their data. And really, the conclusions of just about every paper I looked at is generally, patients are willing to share their data, but they may have some conditions on the data. They want their data to be used to accelerate research and lead to treatments and cures for rare diseases. But they have specific conditions on that, which is perfectly reasonable, particularly around their privacy, minimizing risk, making sure the data is secure, transparent, making sure there's some control over who's using that data, and making sure that there's responsibility and accountability of the platform using that data. Now, I don't think any of those conditions are unreasonable. And we've really been diving into what those conditions look like in the context of RDC-ADAP. We've run a number of focus groups with patient groups and patients to understand exactly what their conditions are and what's necessary for them to be able to share data, and had endless conversations with industry, with academics, with patient groups about what conditions they would have on sharing data sets. And we're using all of that information put together to really develop the governance for RDC-ADAP to make sure people are as comfortable as possible with sharing their data, and that we're meeting the needs of the rare disease community, while at the same time making that data as available as possible, as efficiently and effectively as possible, so people can really use that data to drive drug development forwards. So just thinking about the RDC ADAPT, this is a slightly different way of looking at where you have all the data on the left-hand side of the screen. It goes into RDC ADAPT, and then each user is probably interested in a different subset of that data, depending on what question it is. And we've got to think about two things. First of all, what the permissions and conditions are for sharing the data so that we can get the data in the first place, but also what permissions and conditions we need to have for other people to use the data. Because people may be perfectly happy with RDC ADAPT having access to their data, but then have concerns about some other users. What terms and conditions do they get to use the data for? I want to understand what they're using the data for. I need to know what research is being done on my data. All perfectly reasonable questions. And we've spent a great deal of time lately trying to understand that balance of needs so that we can get data into the platform and make it available without too much difficulty, but meeting the needs of the communities, and particularly the patients who own that data. So if you think about our process for getting data in, the input is data that already exists. We're not collecting new prospective data. So this might be data from a clinical trial. It might be data from an IM rare registry. It might be data from an academic natural history study. And for every individual data set, we talk to the data custodian, the person who's collected the data and knows the data better, and negotiate what we call a data sharing agreement. And that agreement tells us exactly what conditions we can share the data on, how we can use the data, what we can do with the data. And we're trying to make this as standardized as possible, but we recognize that different people have different constraints on how they can use the data based on the consent of the patients who gave it to them, sometimes data privacy laws in certain countries, and sometimes just their own needs as a data custodian that they have uses for it too. But once we have that in place, we transfer the data and we go and explore the data, and we make it available to the level agreed upon with that data custodian. So the data sharing agreement defines the permissions and conditions for sharing data, and also the permissions and conditions for people using that data. And these are the things we've been really trying to work out and balance. How do we optimize this? So the data sharing agreement I already mentioned is a legal agreement between RDC ADAPT and the custodian, which dictates how we can use the data set. It also tells us the data was collected ethically and the consent allows us to use the data. Obviously, in all cases, data transferred into RDC ADAPT is de-identified. I don't know that this is Joe's data or Jane's data or anybody else's data. It's just data based on a certain disease area. And that allows us to transfer and use data more easily. The agreement also tells us how we can share the data, what we're allowed to do with it. Can we share it with anyone? Share it only after we've had approvals through certain steering committees. I'll talk about that in a moment. Or perhaps we can only share metadata or summary data that we can use with this area. That allows us to. It also assures the data custodian that the RDC ADAPT platform is protected and private, and details any other feedback agreed to by both parties. In some cases, people want their database reference to publication or credit to the custodian, and we can include that in the data sharing agreement. So this is a reasonably flexible agreement which tags that data set with how we can use it, how we can share it, and what acknowledgements are needed. And it also provides some details about the data set and any associated documents that may be sent with the data to help us to interpret the data. Because of course, whoever's collected it and the patients themselves are experts on the data, we may not be an expert in every disease. So that's the first part of the process, understanding what the custodian wants in order to share the data. And then we may talk to the custodian about what's in the data. That we almost always end up with questions back to the custodian about what certain aspects mean, because again, you, the owner of the data, are the expert on that data set, and we'll probably need your help a little. And then as we go through, we standardize the data, we understand the data, and we provide feedback back to the custodian. So if you're collecting data in a natural history study or a registry, we may be able to provide information back about gaps in the data that your data set doesn't have, that somebody else's data set in the same area has, data that industry has needed going in to look at your data set. Oh, I wish they collected this item. Data about standardization. Are you standardized with other data sets? And of course, we'll allow you access to your data alongside any other data that you may access through the platform. So that's from the side of the person sharing the data. What about if you want access to the data? The way we're envisaging this is as you come into the platform, you can go into a high-level platform where you can search the summary level data. This isn't individual patient data, but it allows you to understand what data is in the platform that might be useful to you. How does it contain the variables you're interested in? Is it a normal distribution of patients, or is every patient in that database a 5-year-old boy when the disease affects everybody? Understanding whether the data will meet the needs of your analysis. And by just signing some conditions of use, you can get into that search interface and understand if the data you need is in the platform. However, if you want access to patient-level data, it's going to come down to how the data was shared to us. The data sharing agreement tells us whether you can automatically get access to that patient-level data and immediately start doing your analysis. That's not the most common way of sharing per the DCAs we've negotiated so far. Much more often, you'll have to fill in a data use request, which will be reviewed by either a platform-wide data use committee or the platform-wide data use committee and the data custodian or representative of a specific disease field. And that will take a little bit of time. We're trying to set up the process to be as efficient as possible, but that will allow you to get to the patient-level data you may need for more detailed analyses. There also may be some data in the platform that we can use internally within our DCA DAP, at which point we'll share whatever results of analyses and tools publicly. But if people haven't shared data with us in a way that we can share it on, we will at least be able to use it for analyses and share those analyses. So essentially, if you're coming into the platform, you'll have access to summary level data, which you can search and decide if you actually want to go any further based on simple conditions of use. If you want more advanced patient level data, you have the approval process, and then you can use that data either as part of an advanced analytics interface in the platform, which we're still developing, but you'll be able to use any program you like, and tools built into the platform to really analyze that data inside our platform. Or some of the data will be available for download to be used in your own platform, on your own computer at home, and to be submitted for regulatory documentation. So we've been asked a lot about what terms and conditions there would be for use of the data. This is the legal document that would be signed between IDC ADAPT and the users who use the data, and it dictates what the user can do with it. I've only got some of the terms here. It's about a 5-page document, but it really is set up to ensure that this data is secure. It's stored securely either in our platform or on your computer, depending on how we're allowed to share it. It ensures data privacy, limits who can use the data without getting additional permissions. It ensures that if the data is only available for approved research, it's only used for that approved research. It requires acknowledgement of the data source and public disclosures. Again, if the individual data set needs acknowledgement, we can do that, or RDCA DAP as a platform can be acknowledged. It, of course, ensures the ethical use of the data and makes sure that the data cannot be sold or shared on to other users. The data can't be patented. So remember, we're not asking for payment for use of this data, and we don't want other people then taking the data and asking for payment for use of the data either. If the individual custodian is trying to monetize the data, that's a different discussion, but we as RDCA DAP are not charging you for use of the data. We also encourage public disclosure of results because we are a public-facing platform. Our goal is to get all information out there. Anything you learn from the data, we hope will be shared with everybody else as well, so that people don't have to redo the same analysis again and again. So who should be sharing data with the platform? Are we interested in anything in particular? I would say everyone should be sharing data. Patients and patient groups often have registries. Some of them run natural history studies and have really good data collections that cover broad ranges of patients, really get into the patient needs, the patient experience of the disease, and some of those aspects which are really important to understanding what the disease is. Industry has clinical trial data, which is much more rigorously collected, but sometimes over smaller populations and for limited periods of time. But that rigorously collected data is immensely valuable in designing future trials and just understanding how patients behave in trials, which may or may not be exactly the same as in natural history studies. And of course, academics are often collecting big natural history studies, rigorous data collections. They're exploring new outcome measures and biomarkers, which can be very valuable to the whole population as well. to really bring all that data together and for all of us to move therapy development forwards for rare diseases. So, my slide, Bill's slide apparently did not quite work, but that's okay. This is RDCA DAP and the ecosystem of rare disease data. We've recognized we're just one part of a greater ecosystem of rare disease data. We're looking to the community to collect the data. We're not collecting prospective data. We need to work with academics. We need to work with industry. We need to work with patients and with patient groups to bring data in so that we can standardize it, so that we can make it available. And we can provide an interface to help people use that data, turn that data into knowledge and develop these actionable rare disease drug development solutions. But we need the community to help us access the data in the first place, understand that data, and understand what questions we need to answer from that data. And if that sounds like we're asking a lot from the community, we're also hoping to give a lot back to the community. While we're asking you to share your data, we will provide information back about the best ways to standardize data, whether it's in terms of data structure or in terms of common elements that are being collected across related diseases. We'll share what we learn about ontologies, use of instruments. So we'll share the standardized data once it's standardized. We'll provide access to your data combined with other people's data so that you can really do more advanced analyses and really move drug development forwards. And of course, we'll provide access to any tools and analyses that we do to help improve future studies and future clinical trials, and hopefully drive towards more efficient development of new therapies and really drive the community forwards. That's where we're hoping to get. We're still in early days. 1 year in, we have achieved the most extraordinary amount so far, but there's so much more to do. We have 40 rare disease data sets in-house. There are over 7,000 rare diseases. We have miles to go, and I'm looking forward to working with all of the community, our colleagues at NORD, our colleagues at FDA, and everybody else in the rare disease community to get to the point that this is really driving research forward. So people who need access to data to develop a trial know where to get it. They can design the most efficient trial possible using the most advanced knowledge of endpoints and biomarkers and progression of disease, and can really move forwards to develop an optimal clinical trial that gives an answer yes or no as quickly as possible, and we get to move forwards with drugs that work as quickly as possible. So with that, that's the end of my comments.